In this episode, we are taking the mystery out of the CompTIA Cybersecurity Analyst, CySA+, exam by focusing on the structure of the test and the meaning of its domains, because most exams feel more intimidating when they seem like a giant wall of unknowns. New learners often hear words like domains, weighted objectives, simulations, and time limits, and they immediately picture something confusing or unfair, when in reality the exam is trying to measure whether you can think like a developing security analyst. That is an important distinction, because the structure is not there to trick you. It is there to organize the kinds of judgment calls, pattern recognition, and defensive reasoning that matter in modern cybersecurity work. Once you understand what the exam is built to assess, the blueprint starts to feel less like a set of rules imposed from above and more like a map that tells you where your attention should go, how the topics connect, and why each part of the test exists in the first place. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. As of the current official blueprint, CySA Plus is the V3 exam with the series code CS0-003, and CompTIA describes it as a certification built around incident detection, prevention, response, vulnerability management, and communication. The exam allows a maximum of 85 questions, gives you 165 minutes to work, uses a passing score of 750 on a scale of 100 to 900, and combines multiple choice items with performance-based questions, PBQs. CompTIA also organizes the content into 4 weighted domains: security operations at 33%, vulnerability management at 30%, incident response management at 20%, and reporting and communication at 17%. Those numbers matter because they tell you something basic but powerful. The exam is not testing random trivia from all corners of security, but a specific defensive workflow in which you observe the environment, identify weaknesses, respond to problems, and explain what you found in a way other people can act on. One reason the structure deserves careful attention is that the different question types ask your brain to work in slightly different ways. A selected response item may ask you to identify the best explanation, the best next step, or the strongest indicator from a short scenario, which means you are choosing among options and comparing them carefully. A PBQ, by contrast, is meant to feel more like a small simulated task where you have to examine information, connect several pieces of evidence, and make a decision instead of only recognizing a definition. CompTIA notes that most PBQs appear at the beginning of the exam, and it also warns that you will not see a clock while you are working inside those items, which is why understanding structure is also about pacing, not only about content. For a beginner, that matters because it reminds you that success is not just knowing facts in isolation. It is also staying calm, reading closely, and managing your time when the exam changes the way it presents a problem. The domains are best understood as neighborhoods within the same city rather than as 4 separate worlds. If you treat each domain like a sealed box, you can memorize pieces of information and still miss the larger flow of analyst work. In practice, a security analyst moves between observation, prioritization, response, and communication all the time, sometimes within the same incident, which means the exam domains are really helping you organize one larger way of thinking. That is why weight matters, but not in a simplistic way. A heavier domain does not mean the other domains are minor, and a lighter domain does not mean it can be ignored. The weighting simply shows where CompTIA expects more of the exam to live, which helps you understand the rhythm of the test and the kind of professional identity the certification is trying to validate. The largest domain is security operations, and CompTIA places 33% of the exam there because analysts spend a great deal of time understanding systems, monitoring activity, and interpreting what different signals may mean. In the current blueprint, that domain includes system and network architecture, log ingestion, operating system, OS, concepts, infrastructure, network architecture, identity and access management, IAM, encryption, sensitive data protection, malicious activity indicators, tools and techniques, threat intelligence and hunting, and process improvement. That list is broad on purpose, because a defender cannot evaluate suspicious behavior without first understanding the environment in which that behavior appears. You need a sense of what kinds of systems exist, what data sources are available, what normal behavior looks like, and how the organization moves information around. Security operations therefore teaches the exam candidate to become a better observer before becoming a better decision maker, which is a foundational move for the rest of the certification. For a beginner, the easiest way to think about security operations is to imagine a Security Operations Center, SOC, as a place where people are constantly trying to answer a simple but difficult question. Is what we are seeing ordinary, or does it deserve concern? That question sounds basic, but it depends on many kinds of awareness. You need to recognize how systems are supposed to behave, how logs are collected, how users normally access resources, how network patterns typically look, and what sorts of anomalies might point toward misuse, malfunction, or malicious intent. Domain 1 is therefore not about memorizing a pile of disconnected technical terms. It is about learning the language of observation so that alerts, events, and system behavior stop looking like meaningless noise. When that language becomes familiar, you are far better prepared to handle later exam content that asks you to decide whether an issue is serious, how it should be prioritized, or what evidence matters most. The second domain is vulnerability management, and CompTIA weights it at 30%, which tells you this is not a side topic, but one of the central pillars of the certification. The official outline includes vulnerability scanning approaches, interpreting assessment tool output, prioritization, mitigation controls, and vulnerability response. It also expects familiarity with factors such as exploitability, asset value, zero-day issues, compensating controls, patching, configuration management, maintenance windows, exceptions, and the use of Common Vulnerability Scoring System, CVSS, information to help evaluate severity. This domain matters because organizations rarely struggle with the mere discovery of weaknesses. They struggle with deciding what matters first, what can wait, what can be mitigated indirectly, and how technical findings should be handled within real operational limits. CySA Plus is trying to teach a beginner that vulnerability work is not just scanning and listing flaws, but making defensible judgments about exposure, business impact, and realistic response. A common beginner mistake is to picture vulnerability management as a giant cleanup project where every discovered issue is equally urgent, and the only good answer is to patch everything immediately. Real environments are rarely that simple. Some vulnerabilities are severe on paper, but difficult to exploit in that specific environment, while others may have a lower score yet pose greater practical danger because they affect critical systems, exposed services, or widely used workflows. Good analysts learn to think in terms of context, prioritization, and trade-offs instead of panic. That is why this domain pairs technical findings with decision-making. CVSS can inform judgment, but it does not replace judgment. A mature defender considers where the vulnerable asset sits, how it is accessed, what protections already exist, how quickly a fix can be applied safely, and what temporary safeguards might reduce exposure while a permanent solution is being prepared. The third domain is incident response management, weighted at 20%, and it moves the learner from finding signals and weaknesses into handling actual security events in a disciplined way. According to the current outline, this domain includes attack methodology frameworks, incident response activities such as detection, analysis, containment, eradication, and recovery, and the broader incident management lifecycle. CompTIA also includes incident response plans, tools, playbooks, tabletop exercises, business continuity, BC, disaster recovery, DR, forensic analysis, and root cause analysis inside this domain. The point is not to turn a new learner into a senior incident commander overnight. The point is to make sure you understand that response is a process, not a burst of random activity, and that a sound response depends on sequence, coordination, and clarity. Analysts must recognize when an event becomes an incident, help evaluate scope and urgency, support containment and recovery, and contribute to learning after the immediate problem has been stabilized. Many new students initially think incident response is the most dramatic part of security because it is the domain closest to the visible moment when something goes wrong. In one sense, that is true, because incidents create urgency, uncertainty, and pressure. But the more important lesson is that response work rewards discipline more than drama. Good analysts do not jump from alert to action without thinking. They gather evidence, separate assumptions from facts, consider the likely spread or impact, and support steps that reduce harm without creating even more confusion. Recovery is part of the work, not an afterthought, and learning is part of the work, not a ceremonial meeting after the damage is done. When you understand this domain well, you start seeing incident response not as a heroic sprint, but as a structured effort to regain control, restore operations, and improve future readiness. The fourth domain is reporting and communication, weighted at 17%, and beginners are often surprised that CompTIA gives it a dedicated place instead of treating it as background noise. In the official outline, this domain covers vulnerability management reporting, compliance reports, action plans, inhibitors to remediation, metrics, key performance indicators, KPIs, stakeholder communication, incident declaration, escalation, reporting, root cause analysis, lessons learned, and the communication of meaningful findings to different audiences. That content reflects an important truth about cybersecurity work. If a team cannot explain what happened, why it matters, what needs attention, and what should happen next, then much of the value of technical analysis is lost. The exam therefore treats communication as operational work rather than as a soft extra. A candidate is expected to understand that reporting is part of defense because organizations make decisions through shared understanding, not through raw technical evidence sitting silently on a screen. This final domain is often where beginners grow the most, because it forces them to see cybersecurity as a collaborative discipline instead of a solitary technical exercise. An analyst may understand an incident perfectly and still fail if the explanation is vague, overly technical, or poorly matched to the audience. A manager may need a concise statement of risk, impact, and recommended action, while a technical team may need more detail about scope, evidence, dependencies, and next steps. The exam structure reflects that reality by reminding you that the work does not end when you detect the issue or even when you contain it. The value of analysis depends partly on how clearly it is communicated, how responsibly it is escalated, and how effectively it supports action. That is why reporting belongs beside operations, vulnerability work, and incident response. It is one of the mechanisms by which security work becomes useful to the organization rather than remaining trapped inside technical investigation alone. A helpful way to picture the full exam is as one continuous defensive storyline rather than 4 disconnected chapters. Security operations helps you understand the environment and identify suspicious signals. Vulnerability management helps you evaluate weaknesses and decide where exposure deserves attention. Incident response management helps you act when a problem becomes real and requires containment, recovery, and learning. Reporting and communication helps you convert technical findings into something that other people can understand and use. When CompTIA assigns those current weights of 33, 30, 20, and 17%, it is showing you the relative emphasis inside that storyline, not asking you to memorize a chart for its own sake. The exam structure, the question mix, and the pacing expectations all work together to reinforce that analyst work is integrated, contextual, and decision-oriented rather than a collection of isolated factoids. By the end of this discussion, the most useful thing to carry forward is that understanding the structure of CySA+ gives you a mental frame for everything that follows. The exam is not just a bag of questions about cybersecurity. It is a deliberately shaped assessment of how a developing analyst interprets environments, evaluates weaknesses, responds to incidents, and communicates clearly about what matters. Once the 4 domains make sense as parts of one larger workflow, the certification becomes easier to study because every topic has a place, and every place connects to the rest. That clarity reduces anxiety, improves focus, and helps you see why CompTIA built the exam the way it did. When structure stops feeling abstract, the path through the material becomes much more manageable, and the exam begins to look less like a mystery and more like a professional map.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.